Welcome to our Bible study here at Beltrace. And once again, I am glad to be coming to you through the miracle of the pixels. I heard from Melissa today that our lockdown is a little less stringent than it used to be. And I no longer am restricted to particular days of the week to visit you. So my usual spiel about wanting to come and visit you, I can now expand. I can now visit you any one of the 7 days of the week. And she told me it's mostly between the times of 11 o'clock in the morning and 5:30 or so. I need to be out of the building by 6. That's still one of the lockdown rules that they have there. But I can come and visit you pretty much any afternoon, including Saturdays and Sundays. So please let me know if that works for you. Usual contact ways, let Melissa know, let Barbara know. Maybe let Chris know as well. She knows how to get a hold of me. And you also might see me wandering the building. And if that's true, I can visit you now too, because there's now no longer a restriction on my only being able to visit one person at a time. And I'm hearing a plane in the background. So if you're hearing a plane in the background, I apologize. I'm not anywhere near the airport, so there shouldn't be any planes flying that low near my house. I wonder if someone's parking and landing in my parking lot. I hope they don't take my space, because my car's there. That would be a problem. But yes, I want to come and visit you, and I can visit more than one person at a time. Again, we'll still wear masks and we'll still be distant and all of that good, safe stuff. But things seem to be a little bit more manageable, a little bit more under control right now. We're heading in the right direction, and I look forward to seeing you. And you may actually just see me knock. Well, you won't see me knock. Well, you might see me knock. You'll probably hear me knock before you see me knock. You may find me knocking on your door sometime soon, and don't be surprised. And if you're busy or can't visit, that's just fine as well. If I do that, let me know and I will come another time. But I am looking forward to seeing you all. And I hope you've enjoyed some of the movies that there have been up recently. One of the things that has happened is that Melissa has asked me what's in my collection and what I was planning to show and what I've shown before. And we're going through some of the things that I was going to be showing in any case, and other things that I have in my collection, and a couple of things that have been shown once upon a time already. For example, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg film is one that I showed to Beltrace when it first came out, but it's apropos again because of her recent passing away. There may be another one that is related to the same theme, because there was another recent film of her in her earlier days on one of the pivotal cases that had to do with gender discrimination. So look forward to that movie as well, either through Melissa and a streaming service or the disc that I acquire. We'll figure something out and make it happen. But I did let them know that I'm looking forward also to being back face-to-face with regards to our Bible studies. And even if we still have to wear masks, if we can figure something else out in terms of getting together and perhaps still sort of all spread out, we might be in the chapel, but we can actually do things in the chapel now. So we'll see how that works. And we'll cross our fingers and cross our toes, and we'll go with whatever is required to keep everyone safe. And I think that is, of course, the number one thing, which has been all along. And I fully support that and fully applaud that, however much the pixels may get in the way. I do really appreciate the fact that we do have a technological way of being with each other, even in the time that we would rather be face-to-face and in person, live in person. But we do the best we can. And speaking of technology, I hope the microphone is working a little bit better. I've had a little bit of feedback, no pun intended. Microphones give feedback. And some people have said that it sounds better than it used to, because I used to have to talk to a microphone that's sort of way up there. And I sounded like I was shouting, and I sounded like I was sort of shouting into sort of a tin can a little bit. And this microphone is a little bit better at that. I still haven't quite figured out where I need to place it, because I have it, and this may make some noise as I'm touching the microphone. but I'm wearing it on. I don't have a lapel to wear it on right now, so it's on my sort of button on my shirt. But if I bring it up to my mouth like this, you can tell quite a difference there. So trying to figure out if I need to actually position a microphone somewhere closer to my face to make it a good experience, or if that would end up being distracting because it was sort of in there. A lot of singers have the microphone right there. But I will be very fast on the draw to say, don't look for me to sing. I am not a good singer. You don't want that. I think you'll all be heading for the mute button if you sort of hear me start to sing. So we'll leave that in the background. Speaking of the background, you may notice once again, I have a different background up than our usual third floor TV lounge. This is a building which is part of the entrance to a Jordanian city, where it's in Jordan now, called Petra. And you may be aware of this if you are an Indiana Jones fan. And let me see if I can cover the camera here for a moment so you can see it in more detail. Petra is actually, this portion of Petra is actually carved into the mountain itself. And part of the defenses of the city is that it's inside a ring of hills and mountains that you get by going through entrances like these. And Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was filmed in part on site here, the exteriors. If you remember the scenes where they're looking for the lost chalice of Christ, the sort of the Last Crusade, the Holy Grail kind of story, it was inside this building. But in the movie, this building was in Turkey, and in the movie, the interior shots were done 1,000 miles away from this Petra. But it is a remarkable place. I've been there a couple of times, and I hope to go there at least once more in my lifetime. And it reminds me of the type of land in which Abraham and his family would have been traveling. Petra did not exist at that time, but other cities that were built into the earthworks were there, or built from the earthworks. People lived very much closer to the soil and to the rock and to the materials that were around in everyday life as a rural and as a pastoral place, even when they were in the cities. The cities were not that large. So again, here is Petra. And as I mentioned, we're doing the segue into the story of Abraham. And as you may remember, last time we were encountering him, Lot, his nephew, and Abram still at this time, Avram. I'm once again reading from the Shocking book that doesn't want to show up. There we go. 5 books of Moses, translated by Everett Fox, which is a relatively new but very, very interesting translation, and true to form in many ways. And I'm still reading from this. Lot and Abram separated because they had too much between the two of them to be supported in arid climates like this. You can see on the ground in the image that I have here that not a lot is growing. Now that's changed over time, over 3,000 to 4,000 years. Climates change a bit. The desert has encroached a bit more on it now than it used to be, but it was never sort of lush gardens in this part of the world. You have to go up to the Tigris and Euphrates to get things like that, or down to the Nile. This is the between area. But this is also the area where there were some cities like this, 2 of which we know very, very well through their infamy, named Sodom and Gomorrah. What's translated here is Sedom and Amorah. The way people turn words into English is often a little bit strange. We can talk about that a little bit later. But I will default to what we're used to. So I will say Abram or Abraham rather than Avram, and I will say Sodom rather than Sedom, just because we stumble over the the difference when I do that and we lose the real meaning of the story. But Lot separated from Abram, and then the cities of the plains and other cities around the territory banded together against each other. And there was a kind of a war. We might even call it a civil war, since they're all part in many ways of the same kind of overall culture. And Abram got involved in this as a significant figure. So he wasn't just a sort of, okay, hire that guy over there because we need extra people. He was someone who was recognized by the kings and recognized by this other figure I talked about before, Melchizedek, as someone who is of note and of power. And so at the end, when Abram was on the winning side, and Sodom and Gomorrah were also on the winning side at that time, Abram got involved largely because his nephew Lot was wrapped up in all of this, and he needed, as part of his familial duties, to go and be on that side. So they won the conflict. Melchizedek has come and blessed them all and given this very interesting tale. If you didn't learn the tale, I don't want to go into it again because it's a rather lengthy exposition. So watch the video from last time. Here's another time where it's good to have the pixels, because now you can go on my YouTube channel and click last week's Bible study and say, aha, I should have paid more attention there, which is what I did through most of my schooling. I should have been recording everything so that I could learn a little bit better. Most people think I'm a pretty good student, and I think I'm a pretty good student, but the thing is, I know what I'm not getting, and I know what I'm forgetting. At least I know what I don't remember, but I once knew to an extent, if that makes sense. And so I know I could do better. That's the point. So here we are in chapter 14, and Melchizedek has departed, really never to be seen in person again, but he pops up as a reference many times. It says, the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons, and the property take for yourself. So they're sort of dividing the spoils of war. Abram said to the king of Sodom, I raise my hand in the presence of Yahweh, God Most High, founder of heaven and earth. If from a thread to a sandal strap, if I should take anything that is yours, so that you should not say, I made Abram rich. Nothing for me, only what the lads have consumed and the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their share. So Abram had some of his own allies who came along with him along the way. But here's the interesting thing. And I will go back to Melchizedek once more. Melchizedek is shown to be the king of Salem, Shalem, which we think is probably Jerusalem in an earlier guise. But he's also called the God, or the priest of God Most High. And here, in the very next segment of the story, we have Abram swearing by Yahweh, the name of God he's been using up till now, and he then adds God Most High. So it tells us that most likely the God of Melchizedek is also the God of Abram, who also then becomes the God recognized as God by Jews and Christians and Muslims continuously. In a large part, to be a Christian, to be a Jew, to be a Muslim, is to recognize that one God. So here we have an interesting story where he is not taking anything to enrich himself. And this actually sets him in good stead with the powers that be in the territory. Now, the next story that we have, we sort of have an interesting kind of division that comes up. And it's often called the covenant between the pieces. And let me read just a little bit from the commentary in the book here. It says, with the covenant between the pieces, amid scenes of great drama and almost mystery, a number of significant motifs are presented. Abram's expressions of doubt that God will keep his promise about descendants, thus heightening the tension and final miracle of Isaac's birth. And the linking of the patriarch to the event of the Exodus centuries later, and the cutting of a covenant in a manner well known in the ancient world. This last motif, especially in its setting of great darkness and night blackness, takes Abram far beyond the earlier figure of Noah into a special and fateful relationship with God. So what we have here is we're going to have an interesting event take place. It says at the beginning of chapter 15, after these events, God's word came to Abram in a vision saying, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am delivering a shield to you. Your reward is exceedingly great." And Abram said, "My Lord God, Yahweh, what would you give me? For I am going to die accursed. And the son domestic of my house," that is his heir, "is the Damascan Eleazar." And Abram said further, "Here to me you have not given seed. Here the son of my house must be my heir." But here God's word came to him saying, "This one shall not be your heir. Rather, the one who goes out from your own body shall be an heir to you." God brought him outside and said, "Pray, look toward the heavens and count the stars. Can you count them?" He said to him, "So shall your seed be." Now Abram trusted in God, and he deemed it as righteous merit on his part. Now he said to him, "I am God, Yahweh, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit." But he said, "My Lord Yahweh, by what shall I know that I will inherit it?" He said to him, "Fetch me a calf of 3, a she-goat of 3, a ram of 3, a turtle dove, and a fledgling." And he fetched all of these. He halved them down the middle, putting each one's half towards its neighbor, but the birds he did not have. Vultures descended upon the carcasses, but Abram drove them back. Now it was when the sun was coming in that deep slumber fell upon Abram, and here fright and great darkness falling upon him. And he said to Abram, "You must know, yes, know, that your seed will be sojourners in a land not theirs. They will put them in servitude and afflict them for 400 years. But the nation to which they are in servitude, I will bring judgment on them. And after that, they will go out with great property. As for you, you will go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good, ripe age. But in the 4th generation, they will return here, for the punishment of the Amorite has not been paid in full heretofore." Now it was when the sun had come in, and there was night blackness. Remember, that's what we heard in the commentary. And here a smoking oven, a fiery torch that crossed between those pieces. On that day, God cut a covenant with Abram, saying, "I give this land to your seed, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenite and the Kerizzite and the Cadmonite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Rephaites and the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Girgashite and all the Jebushite." Lots of ites there. Lots of people living in this territory. Lots of people living there. Now, some of those we're sort of familiar with through general history. Hittites, certainly. Canaanites and Amorites, we hear quite a number of in biblical texts and outside. But others are a little bit more mysterious to us. The Cadmonites, we don't hear much about them. The Girgashites, we don't hear much about them as well. So the Kenites and the Kenizzites and others. And of course, we're not entirely sure always when we're looking in the archaeological digs and other outside writings beyond the Bible, if these are referring to the same people that have other names in other writings in other places. So this is one of those passages that intrigues historians and linguists and archaeologists as we try to locate where these people might have been, because that's a lot of people for a very small area. When we think of Israel, it's a very small place in terms of land mass, a mid-sized state, one of 50 in the United States, is going to be larger. It's rather close to the sea. But here's the thing: it was the passage between the great river, the river Euphrates, which it mentions here, and the Nile River in Egypt. And both of those places had great civilizations, major empires that lasted for hundreds, in the case of Egypt, for thousands of years. So these were trade routes where people would go back and forth. So great cities like Petra here were built up along the trade routes. And we find a lot of things archaeologically in these trade cities that aren't original to the trade cities. We find things here that have been transported from somewhere else and were often on their way to somewhere else and either got purchased or dropped or lost on the way. And we find not just physical things, but also storylines and traditions and legends. There was a hymn writer named Ephraim of Edessa. Edessa is another city in this part of the world that served as a major trade hub. Well, Ephraim wrote a lot of early Christian hymns. This is a couple of thousand years after Abraham. But he wrote a lot of Christian hymns. His hymns have been found as far away in ancient times, not just in modern times with the internet where everything's everywhere. But in ancient times, as far away as India and China, as far away as France and England, before they were even called France and England, as far away as Morocco. So they had gone everywhere because people would come here, they would hear the hymns, they would write them down and carry them with them back to their own places. Copyright not so big a deal back then. So there were lots of people who had outposts and lots of people who had small cities, and sometimes the entirety of the people. The Canaanites certainly were more of a group that belonged there as natives. The Amorites expanded out into another section. The Hittites actually came mostly from Turkey, what we call Turkey today, and extended down into the area. But this was a sort of a give and take kind of territory. So what we're seeing here is a covenantal story. We're seeing one that's very mysterious. Abram takes, and it's an animal sacrifice. We have to be honest about that. It's an animal sacrifice. He takes several different animals. Noah did as well when he left the ark. So our commentary references Noah as well as Abraham. Noah did it for the entirety of humanity. Humanity got the rainbow as a confirmation. That applies to everyone. The covenant of Noah is with all of humankind. The covenant with Abraham is not that universal directly. It can become more universal as people either convert in or become followers of the different traditions that come out of it. But this is meant for him and for his descendants. And it is one, we talk about the cutting of a covenant. Literally, there was a cut. The animals were halved, half over here, half over here. And there's a mystery and a darkness to it, because almost in a dream, we see this fiery torch and smoking pot going back and forth between the pieces. That's very weird to those of us in the modern world. You would never expect to go into a church and see something like this. And yet you can go into a church, you can go into a worship space of any number of religions and find people using incense, for example, the smoking pot, the smoking oven. And we can see people lighting candles. And in fact, in my old church, we even called the persons who carried the candles in the procession the torchiers, or we just said the torches. Today you're a torch. Today you're the cross. You're the crucifer. You're the crucifix. So we would refer to them in their role as what they were carrying and what they were doing, and so we have that symbolism that's still there with us in different ways, vastly different from what's here. But I'm just showing you we still have different kinds of symbols that, if from the outside people didn't know what we were doing, and they're like, why are they swinging that thing that's on fire all around the stuff that they're about to eat? Because you sense the altar in many Christian traditions with incense before you then do communion. And do you need to do that for any edible purpose? No, that's not the purpose of it. It may have had something to do with it early on. This is also perhaps an amalgamation of different traditions, the censing of the altar in the Jewish tradition with the Last Supper tradition from the Christian tradition, which is not there in the original Jewish tradition. So it's interesting that we have these things that in some ways we may have lost the meanings and we don't quite understand what they are. But again, what Everett Fox is saying in his commentary, that this is not unusual in the ancient world, that animal sacrifice is not unusual, that signifying things, especially in the darkness, there is light. And in the midst of the cloud, we have the light and the holiness in the midst of the smoke or the incense. And when we're thinking about the people as they're coming out of the Exodus, again, the Exodus story is being foreshadowed here. Your descendants will go to another land. They will be imprisoned and then they will be released. When they're released, what happens? They follow a pillar of smoke or a pillar of cloud, and they follow a pillar of fire. Both of those things are right here. Both of those things are right here. So it is interesting the way we have this set up. Now, the next story that comes in the Abram tradition, we're going to start it and we'll finish it next week because it goes for a bit, is one of those stories that if you read the Quran is recounted differently and has a different significance to it. And I'll mention more about that and how the Muslim interpretation, the Muslim take on the story, has really a different outcome, a different meaning. And but it has the same characters that are involved, including Abram and Sarah. So at chapter 16, we again see Abram, who's just been sort of complaining to God, and Abram does complain to God. We shouldn't sugarcoat it. He does complain. He bargains with God, he argues with God, he complains to God. People in the Torah complain. God responds to complaints. And we often in our prayers think, well, you shouldn't put God to the test. But in the Hebrew scriptures, that works. That's in there. So we see a little bit of a response to that mindset of complaining here. It says in chapter 16, Sarah, Abram's wife, had not borne him any children. She had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, now here God has obstructed me from bearing. Pray come into my maid. Perhaps I may build up with sons through her. And Abram hearkened to Sarah's voice, and Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian woman, her maid, at the end of her 10 years of Abram's being settled in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife for him. It's interesting, that construct, as a wife for him, because this is a polygamous society. That would not have been unusual. He came into Hagar and she became pregnant. And when she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became light of worth in her eyes. And Sarah said to Abram, "The wrong done to me is upon you. I myself gave my maid into your bosom. But now she sees that she is pregnant, and I have become of little worth in her eyes. May God see justice done between me and you." And Abram said to Sarai, "Here, your maid is in your hand. Deal with her however seems good in your eyes." And Sarah afflicted her, so that she had to flee from her. But God's messenger found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, Sarah's maid, whence do you come, and whither are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from Sarah, my mistress." God's messenger said to her, "Return to your mistress, and let yourself be afflicted under her hand." And God's messenger said to her, "I will make your seed many, yes, many. It will be too many to count." And God's messenger said to her, "Here you are pregnant. You will bear a son, and you will call his name Ishmael, which means God hearkens. For God has hearkened to your being afflicted. He shall be a wild ass of a man, his hand against all, hand of all against him. Yet in the presence of all his brothers shall he dwell." Now she called upon the name of God, the one who was speaking to her. "You are God of seeing." For she said, "I have actually gone on seeing here after his seeing me. Therefore the well is called the well of the living one who sees me. Here it is between Kadesh and Bered." So it's very interesting, this part, because we see this sort of almost bartering and negotiation going on between Sarah and Abram, and Hagar sort of gets stuck in the middle. It's significant that Hagar has a name, because frequently women in particular in the biblical text have no names. She has a name, and not only does she have a name, God calls her by that name. She's about the first person in the Bible who gets directly addressed by God by name. And she's the first woman who seems to get addressed by God by name in this way. So we get a sense that God knows the names of others, but they don't tend to get addressed in that way. So here we have something significant. We also have something significant where she's fleeing from an injustice, and it really is an injustice. We can see that clearly from what's being put here. She's not being treated properly. She wasn't treated properly from the beginning, and she certainly, maybe she brought a little bit on herself by, it seems like she was acting haughty because she's pregnant and Sarah couldn't get pregnant. And you might have even thought like, nah, 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 kind of thing. Who knows? She's not innocent in all of this, but she's probably more sinned against than sinning, if we use that phrase. I think that comes from Shakespeare. So she's fleeing because Abram eventually takes Sarah's side, not Hagar's side. That's interesting too, that he doesn't take the side of the woman by whom he's about to have a child. He takes the side of one with whom he hasn't. That's rare and strange in the ancient world too. But God tells Hagar, go back and bear it, because the outcome for you and for your son will be worth it. Sometimes it's worth going through the adversity. Sometimes it's worth going through what we have to bear. And she will eventually bear her son Ishmael. And this will set the stage for a conflict but an interesting resolution between Isaac and Ishmael as well. And we'll see a little bit more about both Isaac and Ishmael in the next few weeks as we continue on. And we'll then also at one point return back to Lot and his family in Sodom and Gomorrah. So with that, I will bid you adieu and once again remind you, I'd love to come and visit you. So please let me know if I can. And again, it looks like I can come pretty much any day of the week now. This coming week, I have classes, bar classes in the first 8 weeks. So Monday, I'm not really available, but the other days I would be. The following week, however, I have all the time in the world, essentially, because I'm off. We have our fall break, which is similar to spring break. And that particular time, I'd love to come and visit you all. So don't be surprised if you see me wandering the halls, and don't be afraid to invite me in. I'll have my mask, I'll have my hands washed for 20 seconds or more, and life will be getting back to normal, I hope. And until then, I will see you tomorrow at the church chapel service online, and hopefully soon face to face.